Hey friends, have you ever wondered how you can pay off your mortgage faster? Or maybe you like to help your kids get into the real estate market. Or better yet, retire with some passive income. Well, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Sylvia Ho Mortgage Podcast. My name is Sylvia. I'm here to teach you how to achieve your goals simply by owning just one more property. Hey friends, welcome to the Jump Podcast. Today we have Daryll. Daryll is a real estate investor. We're going to talk about his relationship to debt and how him and his wife were very adverse to debt. They're like, oh no, we want to get rid of debt. We want to get rid of debt. Until he fell into real estate through a conversation where he found someone that he trusted and guided him through this whole process. And his first two investments were two condos, pre-construction condos that he bought within the first 6 months. It's now 8 years later, and we talk about how he manages his own properties. Daryll, welcome to the Jump Podcast. Hey everyone, it's Sylvia here. Thanks for joining me on the Jump Podcast. Today we have Daryll, and Daryll is a real estate investor. He owns condos, he owns houses, he owns properties that are out of town. And we're going to really focus on why he believes in real estate, why he got into it, and how he manages all these properties. So Daryll, thank you very much for coming onto the podcast. Why don't you tell me a little bit more about yourself, and then we could talk about, your real estate investing life.
Thanks, Sylvia. I appreciate you inviting me onto this podcast. Many moons ago, I used to be an accountant and finally got out of that, tried to do something different, and I eventually landed up doing some training and development work, and that led me to owning a couple of health clinics for about 10 years or so. Just recently, I got out of the healthcare business, and I went back to doing consulting for some manufacturing and service companies. And so in between that time, I've been looking at, my wife and I have been looking at real estate and see how that could be our next stage in our investment.
What's your wife and you thinking about real estate?
We've always thought about real estate, but I think we were always hesitant. And probably maybe about 8 years ago, the acupuncturist that used to work for me had suggested I talk to his real estate agent. And I talked to her, and she gave her a story, and he kind of said, "Oh, this seems like the right person that we feel comfortable to do our first purchase." And she didn't really push us to buy anything too big. The first one was a one-bedroom apartment near St. Lawrence Market. And so we really thought real estate could expand our portfolio, but didn't really know how. And when she came along, that helped us solve the equation, someone to kind of handhold us. Mm-hmm. I think that's what we were looking for. We were fairly conservative investors. Our house was paid off for. And, we were thinking not to expand our debt levels because I don't think we were comfortable at that time. But after our first foray into our condo, I guess the rest was history. Then we started to look at some other properties. I think this was about 8 years ago. And I think we bought two in a matter of about 6 months. And then maybe a year later, we bought another property that's still being constructed at this time.
Okay. So it sounds like you got into this whole real estate investing through a conversation, and then you've been always thinking about it, but just didn't really know how to get started. But because you had someone that you trusted and someone who can really guide you through this, you're like, oh, I feel comfortable in doing this. And you just did it in little baby steps.
Yeah. And I think this is where for people to consider is make sure that they are talking to a few experts, people that they feel comfortable with and that they trust, that can guide them through the process. So either they're talking to you. For us, it was that real estate agent that helped guide us through. But there was also a comfort level that our friend had worked with her, and he had purchased 2 or 3 properties. And so I thought we had a good enough base of expertise there to draw upon from different to offer different points of view.
You mentioned something about, being conservative about debt, and then now your idea about debt has changed. Talk to me a bit more about that, kind of like what you guys are thinking about then.
If I had to characterize our debt, it would be more like a relationship. What's your relationship with money? What's your relationship with debt? I think for us, before meeting the real estate agent, we were kind of adverse to it. And I don't think we fully understand how to use it safely and appropriately. And I think once we saw that the debt servicing, for example, the mortgage was going to be, it was going to be covered by the renter. And so there wouldn't be a lot of cash outflow, and there hasn't been any cash outflow for us for that. So that gave us peace of mind. I think so. That's where you start to do some planning about how this works. You look at the markets, and you're seeing, okay, well, it's a pretty tight rental market. I think we're not going to have any problems to rent it. Even the real estate agent was guaranteeing, if we got into her property management program, would guarantee us clients, or she would pay for, pay the rent, which I thought was an interesting proposal.
Very interesting proposal. So it sounds like you went from an individual who are like, oh no, let's get rid of debt. Let's get rid of debt. We don't want any debt, to, hey, I now understand the power of debt, and how it could help me build wealth.
Yeah, I used to think like, money was bad, and I don't think money is good or bad. It's the way how you use it. And I think that could be also the same thing. Is how do you use it appropriately and wisely? You can definitely do too much of it, or you can definitely be too little about it. And so you figure out where your comfort level is. That allows you to earn a nice return.
One thing that they say, rich people, the wealthy, the super wealthy people, they totally understand the idea of debt, right? They never want to sit on dead equity. So what they do is when they buy a place, they buy it in cash. And then the next day they turn around and they borrow against it and they go invest that money, right? And that's the whole idea about, the power of debt and how to, build wealth.
That makes sense. And so, when we were looking at one of our properties at Niagara on the lake, what we did, this was during the pandemic, we did notice that, during the downturn, there was some bed and breakfasts being sold. And we were just puzzled why there were so many bed and breakfasts. And now this is coming up, I think they were selling because they were buying a debt that was for business. They would have been leveraged appropriately to take advantage of all of it. And I guess during the pandemic, that was, very difficult to take care of. And so now that we're moved past through it, now there's an opportunity to think about, what's the appropriate amount of debt that we can use to leverage and get a better return than we have just by purchasing or just having equities.
Mm-hmm. You just told us that you bought a property out in Niagara on the Lake, right? Niagara on the Lake. Yeah. So you manage your own properties. You have condos, you have houses, and you manage your own properties. Talk to me about what that life is all about. Because a lot of people are scared about that stuff. They're like, oh, I don't want to deal with tenants and so forth. So tell me how you manage it. How do you do it? What do you do?
So I'll split it in two ways. I'll talk about the two condo properties that we have right now, and then the house on Niagara on the Lake. So the two condo properties, we manage it, and they were pre-construction when we bought it in 2020. And so obviously at the beginning of the life of a condo, there isn't much to do. So what we did was use the real estate agent to help us find our first tenant. And so that has been a big help. So I think if you're not comfortable getting your first tenant, then finally get a real estate agent to do it. Sometimes it's actually worth it. And managing the property, those two properties has been pretty good. I think it also happens, it depends on the relationship that you have with your renters. And both renters have been fairly low key, easygoing, and helpful. That, some of them, that one of them considers it to be home. And so when you consider it to be home, it just makes it easier for a relationship to do things. Because of the pandemic, I've actually never been to those units since they've been rented out. And I think they're comfortable with that. And I remember one renter, this probably is not going to happen all the time. I think there was a plumbing issue or there was something wrong with the stove. And she decided to take care of that herself rather than have us take care of that. And so when you find a good renter and they're paying on time, that's they're worth their weight in gold.
Okay. So the two properties that you manage downtown, the two condos, they've been pretty low key, not as much hands on. A lot of investors, a lot of my beginning jump investors, they do buy condos just because condos are easier to manage. Right?
Yeah. And I certainly agree. That's why, because there isn't a lot of property maintenance you have to take for a condo. For our house in Niagara on the Lake, on the other hand, that is a little bit more or a lot more work? I think it's a lot more work that's involved there. So we are planning to Airbnb that in the next couple of months. And while we've been managing it for the past year, it hasn't come online. We are eventually going to have to get a property manager just because the city of Niagara on the Lake, I believe, requires that we have somebody that responds to a guest inquiry within 45 minutes. And since we still live in Toronto, we wouldn't be able to do that. And so that has kind of forced our hand for us that we have to get a property manager for the Niagara on the Lake property.
So if I was going to summarize it, the condo, you pay condo fees, but it's easier to manage. But then when it comes to a house, now this one is a little bit different because it's Airbnb and it's out of town. But when it comes to a house, you don't pay the condo fees, but there's a little bit more managing involved.
I believe so, yes. Yeah. I would agree with that.
Okay. You kind of fell into real estate, right? Through that conversation.
Yeah.
So when you fell into real estate, obviously it wasn't like a planned thing. So what do you like about real estate investing now that you've been in it for 8+ years now?
If I say what I like about real estate, it's probably the purchase of a physical assets. That's, I'm going to take out this amount of debt, but this debt is actually there's a physical property attached to it. Versus what happens if I brought, took some debt out and bought some stocks or something. What's it being backed up against? And so we felt comfortable with this, and obviously, I think that brings a certain amount of comfort level for the banks or your mortgager. And so I think that's why we decided to go into real estate. And I think part of this was to round out the portfolio. We understood mutual funds and stocks and how those work, but we didn't really know about real estate. And I guess you listen and you hear stories about people building their wealth through real estate, but we just became more curious about that. And so that's what led us to the next step to talk to that real estate agent.
Okay. So you fell into real estate and you wanted to balance out your portfolios. But the one thing that you really love about real estate, and I love about real estate, is that it's tangible. You see it, you feel it, the value has gone up over time, right? So that's what I love about real estate. And it sounds like it's very similar for you as well.
Yeah, I think we've been lucky to get in fairly early, and over the number of years, there's been some price appreciation. And so I guess you need to look at the capital appreciation of the asset, but then also cash flows on a yearly basis. Do those make sense for your situation?
Okay. So I am sure that the audience is curious about this whole Airbnb thing. With the Airbnb, how has your experience been in getting it? Because it's obviously has to be a legal Airbnb. You could have a property manager. How has that process been for you right now?
It's been a long path. There's two things that were going on. First of all, there are city requirements for Niagara on the Lake for short-term rentals. And so those are additional requirements that have to be met. I'm not familiar with the ones in Toronto, but in other cities. But from my experience, talking to a couple other people, some of them don't have any Airbnb requirements. And so it's easier to get started up and running. For example, our basement room has a window and it needs to be a proper escape hatch, not just a regular window. And so because of the pandemic, there's a supply chain, things are backed up 3 to 6 months. And so that has delayed us from getting the final approval. It's been an ordeal. We're really close to it. I'm glad we've got this property manager that we trust. And I think we see the light at the end of the tunnel here. We also hired an interior decorator to make it easier for us to tie in all the elements of the house. And so we're quite happy about that. So the pride of ownership there is evident.
Excellent. So it sounds like you're reaching out to professionals in the area to, get this investment going and get this investment, started faster. And you're happy.
Yes, I think we're happy. Yeah, we are happy with the professionals that we have interacted. Just part of it is being so far away. We kind of want to turnkey and rely on the experts. And so this property manager is not just managing the property, they're also going to manage the Airbnb. And so they're going to set up the listing. I think they might do some cross-listing of other platforms. We'll see about that.
Okay. We had just talked about you have a condo that's coming up. for occupancy. That was a new construction property that you bought like way back when, right? And you're thinking of moving into this property. Talk to me a little bit more about what your thinking is there.
So there's another property that's coming online in a few months. And just because of the landscape of the economic landscape and where interest rates are, it's becoming interesting about how we are going to earn. Well, there's two ways to earn a return from our short time being a real estate investor: is the capital appreciation or through the cash flow that you earn on a monthly basis. For this particular property, we will definitely have some capital appreciation from that, but not so much from the cash flow. I don't know if we're going to be able to make rent or find a renter who's going to pay that amount to cover our mortgage and our other expenses. And so we are seriously considering moving in to take over that property, rent out our current home, which is kind of a townhome, and then we stay in our property or this new condo for at least a year, so we can actually get the protection of the principal residence exemption for that capital appreciation. And so I think the market, it's been interesting. We just had our conversation with my wife just the last 2 weeks. We've really had to be more deliberate about how our real estate and how our finance strategy is going forward here, because we do have multiple properties on the go, and how do we manage it so we're not necessarily out of pocket too much in the short term.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I find that real estate gives you a little bit more flexibility, right? So, okay, last question I'm going to ask you today is, what's one advice that you would give to your younger self?
I would say start the conversation sooner rather than later. When I say start the conversation is, if you're interested in real estate, for my interest in real estate was just kind of lurking about and saying, yeah, I'm interested in real estate. I'm interested in real estate, but it didn't really do anything about it until I met my acupuncturist who introduced me to the real estate agent. If I was to say, hey, I have had this inkling in my head about this, real estate, I'm not so sure about it. So what's the next step? What can I do to move that football down the field? And thankfully, just the meeting with the acupuncturist, having those few more conversations, just blossomed into me in that real estate. And so when you have a few more conversations and you get more comfortable with that, then you kind of actually learn to see what's your relationship with that, or what's your views on debt or real estate may be correct or incorrect, and you start to test those things. And when you have more people on your side, that makes it a lot easier.
Beautiful, beautiful. This has been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, Daryll, for sharing your experiences in the real estate and how you just kind of fell into it, and that your younger self advice would be start the conversation earlier.
That's right. Thank you, Sylvia.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, to all of my Jump audience, Jump is all about owning just one more property and building wealth through real estate. Doing what the rich and wealthy people do is using your equity that's in your home and leveraging that to retire earlier, to have passive retirement income. And the advice that Daryll is giving us is to use professionals and to start the conversation earlier. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Daryll, for coming. We just heard from Daryll. Oh my goodness. He talks about his relationship with debt and the power of debt and how his view changed on what debt is all about, how him and his wife changed their view on the power of debt. Yeah. And then the second thing that he talks about is how he fell into real estate and how he had a trusted individual to guide him throughout this whole process. The Jump process, by working with me, you go through the whole Jump process, and I put together a personalized plan and a personalized strategy to help you understand what it means to own just one more property and build wealth through real estate. I would be your trusted guide in this whole process. Contact me through my website, book a time. I'd love to chat. It's Sylvia. Peace out. Hey friends, thanks so much for listening to the Sylvia Ho Mortgage Podcast. We'll catch you on the next episode. You want to learn more about the Jump program? Please connect with me at sylviaho.ca. Love to hear from you. All it takes is 15 minutes for us to chat to see if this will work for you. Thanks, guys.